He says, you
Sure.
diligently explained why the 12 disciples couldn't have fabricated the resurrection. However, is it possible that these 70 to 72 disciples in Jesus' Luke 10 could have stolen the body of Jesus?
Okay, I always say the same thing when someone says, is something possible? I always say, yes, absolutely. It's absolutely possible that the 70 or 72 disciples of Jesus, somebody could have outside that circle of 12, could have stolen the body. It's absolutely possible. The question, though, is not whether it's possible, it's whether it's reasonable. Because we don't care about possible in criminal trials. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt because you'd never convict anybody. That's a very high standard. There's nothing, and judges have jury instructions that say this. Judges will actually say this. There is nothing about which I could not level a possible or imaginary doubt. That's the way the jury instruction is written. So that's why the standard is not beyond a possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. So what we're looking for is the most reasonable inference. Did somebody steal the body? Stealing the body, though, would have to be part of a much larger narrative because it's not just that we have an empty tomb. It's that we have a claim about a risen Jesus, resurrection appearances. And so now you got to so it's a combination of things. Are we saying that those are what then? If you can steal the body, it won't explain the appearance of. It's going to have to be part of a much larger narrative, right? A much larger scheme of which just the first part is steal the body. Then you've got to actually add to that somebody and maybe an imposter or somebody who. And there's reasons why I would reject the imposter version of this, and I talked about those in the book. But again, all this does, all that at best, all that could do for you would be just to answer one small part of the narrative of the New Testament, an empty tomb. But it would not explain, for example, the resurrection appearances. It would not explain did the ascension occur. Then you have to say, well, they're lying about that then. Well, if they're lying about that, then why can't you just say they're lying about the empty tomb? But one of the 12 could have done it. If it's all a lie, then it's all a lie. But if we're saying that, hey, maybe somebody outside the 12 stole it, then how do we have the resurrection appearances? That's the problem.
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons why I said that. I feel like you have this sort of philosophical mind or background, or that's just the way that you function and work. And even in reading your book, which, by the way, I highly, highly recommend picking it up. If you haven't read Cold Case Christianity, if you can get in focus here. If you haven't read this book, definitely pick it up. Really, really good read. It's actually a book that you don't really want to put down. And there's a lot of information in here that you may not be aware of. He even has a full case here that the book of Mark was influenced by Peter as an eyewitness. So that's really cool. And there's a bunch of different lines of evidence that he provides in here. But anyways, back to the point, back to your philosophical sort of mind. And this distinction that you make between a possible...
But Cameron, by the way, I am not like a brilliant philosophical thinker. All I am is somebody who's trying to anticipate what the defense is going to say. And that's really all this comes down to. A lot of what we're doing, and when we do a case, the DA is already thinking the same way. He's thinking, and this is the dirty little secret about district attorneys, is they're elected officials. They're only going to file a case they think they can win. And the funnel point is not at the trial. The funnel point is at the filing. Most cases that detectives bring to district attorneys don't get filed at all. So the ones that do get filed are the ones where the DA is thinking, okay, I can win this. And one of the things the DA does and taught me to do is to think all the way through from I don't take anyone, no handcuffs go on any suspect until I've already thought about what this is going to look like in front of a jury. And what will the defense team do? And if you do that, you're going to be okay. And so a lot of what I'm doing here is thinking about how do I get this reasonable possible definition. These are just simple evidence instructions, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of that is me trying to figure out how do I jump that hurdle in front of a jury and what's the defense going to try to say?
Yeah. Well, in any case, I mean, philosophically, that's one of the first things that you got to point out is that there's a distinction to be made between what's possible and what's reasonable. And even the way that you even use the word reasonable as opposed to probable in philosophy, right. If you wanted to be sort of technical, you just say probable.
Yes.
You could also mean
plausible.
Plausible.
Used, yeah. And for example, Greg Kokel, I've already kind of beaten up a little bit. I'll just continue to beat him up. He's a good friend, but he'll always use plausible and possible because they alliterate better. But that's not the legal definitions. It's not beyond a plausible doubt or beyond a probable doubt. It's beyond reasonable doubt when you get to jury trials.
Yeah, well, I actually like that better because I think people kind of understand what reasonable means and that sort of standard. Yeah, you want to find a reasonable explanation. You don't want to find just a possible explanation, because you can think up a possible explanation of anything. And even in some of your talks and lectures that I've heard you do, you'll give an example of like, I think you'll start out some of your talks saying, well, it's possible, that there's aliens and there's fog in here and we can't see the fog. And it's like aliens are causing us to have all of these experiences. And that's possible, but is it reasonable? And the answer obviously is no. Looks like I might have lost him here. I want to make sure that I'm not losing you guys. Let me know if you can still hear and see me in the live. Okay, there he is. He's back. All right, Jim's back.
Got you back. Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're right. I try to use an example like that just because I want people to see that difference, right? And also I would say that, look, if you were to operate on the basis of possible doubt, you would be frozen in fear because so much is possible, especially right now in a COVID-19 kind of environment, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the possibility of getting sick could keep us inside forever, right? But I always say it this way, you know how many cars blow up in the driveway when someone puts their key in the ignition? This happens every year somewhere in America. Someone's going to be blown up in a car. That's always possible. You don't know if your car is leaking gas. You don't know if somebody even put a bomb under your car. You don't know. But we don't operate on that assumption because we would never put our key in the car. You never put our key in the ignition. Instead, we operate on what we think is the most reasonable inference, given our experience, given our common sense.
Right.
And that's why, by the way, that's one of the standards we talk about in jury trials too. We don't use like Bayesian theories to talk about what is probable in this case and give you a formula to plug in all the possible response. No, we don't do that. We just say that the jury instruction is that you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are to use this thing that is probably lacking a lot these days. Your common sense is enough to determine if this is true. I don't need you to get beyond a certain percentile. We're not trying to get at certain percentages. We're trying to say, if you would, I guess basically we would say, if you think this suspect is guilty to the point that you wouldn't want your kids around him or your daughter to marry him, if your common sense tells you that based on all the evidence, this is more reasonable than not, this is the most reasonable inference from evidence, then you're going to convict this guy.
All right, let's move on to another question. This one's from Min Nat Lee. He's one of our Bereans, one of our supporters. He says, what has convinced you that the Gospels are historical instead of myths, and the alleged contradictions didn't disturb you, or did they?
No, actually, I tell people all the time that, a couple of things. When we say I'm glad he used the expression alleged contradictions, because I agree. I mean, I think there are definitely differences between the Gospels. There's no doubt about that. But I will tell you that was the thing that provoked me. I'm reading the Gospels to mine out the red letters. That's it. That's the only thing I'm trying to do when I first started. What makes Jesus so smart? And as I'm reading it, I can see that there are similar stories or the same account, the same event occurs in Mark, let's say, that it does in Matthew, yet it's told in a slightly different way. And that is so common. As a matter of fact, that was the thing that provoked me to test the accounts under a template that I use for eyewitness reliability. It was because they had a level, and this is probably as much an art as a science. When you listen to 5 or 6 people tell you the story, we have a murder down the street, and I go down the street to interview witnesses, and I have my partners canvass the neighborhood where they're going to go and knock on every door. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? And they collect now like 15 different witness statements of either things that were heard or seen. Well, guess what happens when I sit down at the desk the day after tomorrow and I start to read through those 15 accounts? Oh my gosh, it's a mess because they don't precisely agree. And I'm trying to maintain the disagreement. In other words, the only requirement I have when I leave in the morning to go to a murder scene or in the middle of the night when someone calls me at 1 a.m., I will just ask the dispatcher to have the officers at the scene separate the eyewitnesses. Because if you don't separate those eyewitnesses, they're going to talk to each other, and they're going to give you the same story 10 times. I want 10 slightly different versions of the same event, because I know that allows each person then to let their own backgrounds, their own likes and dislikes, their own personalities, their own way they're wired to shape the way they tell the story. And then I can puzzle it all back together and get a really robust version of the story. So when I saw those differences in the Gospels, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Because my job is to puzzle them. Now, by the way, if you don't think that the first readers of these Gospels, I can tell you that people like Ignatius, Polycarp, Clement, Irenaeus, These early students, or at least the first three, are students of the eyewitnesses. They will reference all four Gospels. So it's clear from the very first generation of students of the eyewitnesses that all four Gospels are available to them, and they are starting to quote from them, and they are all slightly different. And it didn't disturb anybody. As a matter of fact, we have some church fathers that talk about that each Gospel author brings his own, what's important to that author, into the game. And it's clear that they could have number one, they could have got rid of three of them. They could have said, you know what, this is going to look bad. These are slightly different. Let's harmonize. Tatian does this many years later. He wants to create a harmonized version of like one gospel for his followers. Well, look, I'm glad they didn't do that. They clearly could have. And it didn't bother anybody in the first generation that they were slightly different. I would actually argue by the time John writes his gospel, he's got the other three, and he knows what the other three said. And it's not like he's trying to correct them. And this is so typical of eyewitness accounts. I see nothing contradictory in the accounts, but I do see things that have made complementary assessments. So, like, how many angels are at the tomb? Well, it's one or two, depending on how many women are at the tomb. Well, look, the fact that I'm focused on what one angel is saying and never even described the second angel, that's so common. And if you don't have a follow-up interview in which you say, hey, I know you're talking about the one angel, so that's all was there? How many, that's all was there is one? If you don't ask that follow-up question the next day, it remains like a question for the defense to attack. And because we cannot go back and re-interview the gospel authors, and this is often the case with my cold cases because those people are now dead, but I am sometimes stuck with apparent contradictions when in fact it's just that this is the nature of different accounts. You're hearing noise behind me as of course, Cameron, we happen to you picked Gardener Day, okay? So I've got my gardener outside weed whacking my backyard. But yeah.
No worries, I'll just mute you and then I'll just talk for the rest of the time.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
just
going to
kidding.
have to. But I honestly, I do think that was the thing that provoked me to, I would have assumed if it was fixed. Do you think that skeptics would be any more comfortable or with the Gospels if there were four that were identical word for word? No, they'd be even more skeptical. I'd be more skeptical. Or if there was only one, I'd have more. But the fact that there are four slightly different angles on the same guy, Jesus of Nazareth, I think is helpful. And it gives us a much more robust picture of who Jesus was.